Oh man, here they come again.
Here they come again. This still has skin on the skull.
And so you have also another god that's recorded in the same area where Nergal would be recorded in the Bible. That's called Nebaz, which means a barking god. And just as Anubis is a jackal god, you have this enduring mythos throughout our history of dog Nephilim and dog warriors and dog men.
Yeah.
And so there's another kind that's not perhaps a cherubim that is also creating, and actually with Anubis, he creates Sinoopolis, as the Greeks called it. That means dog city for all the offspring that he created that looked like him as warriors. And it's kind of the epicenter for the dog mythos as a Nephilim or a man.
That is wild. That is wild. So
sorry I went on such a long
based
tangent.
On that information, no, you're here to talk. Like that's it's all great. So based off the information you just shared, you seem to really focus in on sharing information without giving your opinion. But I'm going to ask you for your opinion. When it comes to the dog entities, let's just do the dog entity one. Like that lineage. Do you think that what we're dealing with today, when people are saying they're coming across these dogman creatures outside and being stalked by these creatures, do you think that this is remnant of that?
I think so. I mean, we actually have these as giant warriors right up till past 1000 AD. And, Saint, I'm trying to remember the saint now. Is it Christopher? I think it's Christopher, who is depicted in Greek Orthodox imagery with a dog's head, and as somebody from North Africa that somehow is connected back to Canaanites, who was this mercenary dog warrior who converted to Christianity. I think there's a residue of that. I don't know how much and how much is myth, but it's kind of like the alien thing, right? There's something there. Are all of the sightings legitimate? Probably not, but you don't have to have very many or you only need one to make it legitimate, right? So, I think that's at the heart of it. And there's so much information on the dog mythos. I've done a full show just on that.
Wow. I mean, I think we need to tap into it a little bit here. So Saint Christopher, underneath this idea, do you think then that it's possible for these I just call them entities, for lack of better terminology, to convert to like a Christianity faith? And would that be accepted by God?
Yeah, I think so. Wow. Yeah. So, and we actually get some examples of that. So you have like Uriah the Hittite, who would be a hybrid Hittite. And I cover off how the hybrids come about in the new book, and they were called Shazu in the execration texts of Egypt. So they were 7 to 9 feet tall. They are offspring of human males that come out of the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 and First Chronicles, and from a covenant land perspective, specifically the Canaanites and the 9 patriarchless hybrids, which Heth isn't one of. He's actually son of Canaan as a Sidon, but when you get into the families, they don't have a patriarch. Out of all of the 70 nations after the flood, 9 that are listed in the Table of Nations don't have a patriarch. Well, that's really kind of weird. And everybody says, well, they're just a division of Canaan and his 2 sons, but then they would list a son like they did in all the other sons that are listed in the Table of Nations, and they don't. The patriarch's not listed as a Rephaim patriarch that they intermarried with when they settled into the covenant land. And they did that because of the fertility issue, which is another topic. I don't want to get sidetracked here. And they were 7 to 9 feet tall, not as tall as Rephaim. So Goliath at 6 cubits and a span being king of Gath, would be 11 feet 3 inches tall. Og's bed was 9 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, so likely, and he's king of Edrei and Ashtaroth, and made of iron to hold his weight, and he would have been minimum 12 feet, just as a lot of giants in Greek mythology, like Orontes or Achilles and others, are around the 12 feet, but probably more likely 13, 14, maybe as much as 15 feet tall, and 4 to 5 feet wide, maybe 6 feet wide. I'm thinking 4 to 5. And also understanding that the giants are stout. And I cover this off in the next book. And I foreshadow it in book 1 is that they have a height to width ratio of 2 to 1. That word stout that's used and other words that mean stout that come out of Hebrew may not be translated as stout, but it goes back to that word to show that they were these wide, muscular, and huge in terms of height creatures. And so when we look at the Rephaim patriarchs, none of them are listed in the Table of Nations. Rapha, for the Rephaim, I also cover them and their patriarch and which god they come from, and take that back biblically. Rapha is not in the Table of Nations. And so some people will say, well, that's just sort of generic for giant. Okay, fine, I get that. But there's an MO of eponymously naming a tribe after the patriarch. And in Genesis 14, we get a tribe of Rephaim giants. And in Genesis 15, we get a tribe of Rephaim giants. So it can be used for both. So both are true. But the one that stands out is Arba. Arba is the patriarch, according to the book of Joshua, for the Anakim, who are Rephaim, as they're described in Deuteronomy 2. So we have examples of giants not being listed in the Table of Nations. Also with the mighty men, you have a Makathite. It should be Makathim. That's part of the mighty men of David. Now, mighty, as in Gibberim, doesn't mean all of David's men were giants. It can mean strong, or being a warrior. It can mean noble. It can mean a lot of things. It's used 158 times in the Old Testament, not always for a giant. Sometimes it's for the strength of God as it's used. And Gibberah is the plural that would be used to the application of that power for the strength of God. So you have to be careful with the application of Gibberim. And so, but Makkah, who is a patriarch, and the city of Makkah, and the house of Makkah, that's in the Mount Hermon and Bashan region of giants, the land of giants, as it's called in the Old Testament, and the father of a daughter that is going to marry David, that's going to produce Absalom, who is going to create a rebellion to overthrow David and put a hybrid on the throne, is all part of the new book as well. But just to give you an idea that Makkah isn't also in the Table of Nations. So only humans' names are put in from Noah are put into the Table of Nations, and the patriarchal giants aren't. And so you have another account in Genesis 36, which really nails it. And would normally be part of the Table of Nations. You get the Dukes of Edom. And they're not explaining where the Dukes of Seir come from, and they're Horim, which are, as they're described in Deuteronomy 2, are giants. And so you don't have Seir as the patriarch. You don't have Hori as you take Horim back, or Horite back to Hebrew as being the patriarch. And then he produces, through Seir, a daughter named Timnah, who's going to marry Eliphaz, son of Esau, brother to Jacob, to produce a hybrid giant nation called the Amalekites. Not the giants, because this is Genesis 36, as several generations after Genesis 14, where the Amalekim giants were at war against those Mesopotamian 4 kings that included Arioch.
Wow. When you talk about all this stuff, you really draw a picture that is obviously, this. It's not talked about heavily in modern Christendom. I personally feel like what you're talking about and sharing could really, like, it paints a picture that giants obviously were very prevalent, so prevalent that it maybe even went to the point where the writers didn't feel the need to lay out all the information over and over again at redundancy.
Yeah. It was just accepted.
Yeah.
As knowledge, understood, commonly understood. It was part of life.
And I feel like because they when they were writing these things down, I don't think that they were writing them down thinking that thousands of years later we'd be sifting through it trying to understand things that were so common knowledge for them back then. Do you think that the information that you've uncovered through the first book, the second book, third book, and the fourth book eventually, do you feel like this information is going to be? I personally believe this. Do you think that the information you're sharing is information that could really be beneficial and helpful for future people to understand the world that's happening around them?
Yeah, and particularly if we're in the fig tree generation, and
what
we
do you
might
mean by
be.
That?
Well, in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and also in the book of Luke, Jesus gives an oration of the end time events, and he provides three overarching signs as well. One is the sorrows, and those catastrophes will get stronger throughout the fig tree generation, which he talks about later on and after the chronological events that he's providing. And the fig tree generation, all of those events will take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but his words will never pass away. And then immediately after that is the days of Noah sign. And you need to understand those overarching signs to understand what's happening. If we don't understand that we were created as humans to be the resolution to the angelic rebellion, and that the fallen angel's response to that is to bring Adam and Eve down first in Eden, and then to create giants to destroy humankind from the face of the earth to be remembered no more, just as the Amalekites swore that oath and then spread that to other nations around the area to wipe Israel from the face of the earth to be remembered no more, so that the Messiah can't come along to raise humankind up as to be like angels in the future time, and then to judge these angels, these fallen angels, for the crimes that they committed against creation and against humanity. It's the context for who we were, our history, and where we're going. And in the end time, that gets resolved. And so if you're going to understand end time prophecy, you have to understand the context of what happened in prehistory. And what I do in book 2 is I highlight the terms and the context you're going to need as I'm going through and naming all of the giants that I can find that are listed in the book, all of the hybrids, go through all of the giant wars. Then I connect that into a chronology for end time prophecy and give you the context I provided you in the first book that give the larger context for what's going to happen in the fig tree generation. And just all of a sudden things just start to make sense. And it dawned on me that I didn't answer a question at the beginning is that, how do we know that they're walking around us today other than the genealogies? And what I also mentioned was a fertility issue. And so what's happened is they have intermarried throughout the generations because they had this fertility issue. And as you do that and you bring in more human blood and DNA, the original features from your godfathers gets diluted over time, even though they're going to intermarry to keep that as pure as possible to prevent blood diseases like Habsburg jaw or hemophiliac disease and a whole bunch of other ones that are associated with too close of intermarriage. You have to dilute that to a certain degree. So you're going to get smaller. You're going to lose those serpentine looks. You want to look at Akhenaten 1,000 years after the flood, that's a serpentine face, complete with the elongated skull. But over time, they lose that, and they lose that height as well. So that's why you can't see them. They're here. They're just tracking their genealogies and their bloodlines and their blood types and all of that fanaticism that you see about all of that for where we came from is for them to track their spark of the divine, that 1,000 points of light that they're going to try and collect in the end time. Now, how do we know they have a fertility issue? It's a great question, and it leads right back into what we talked about with Timnah and Eliphaz, and with the hybrids of the Canaanites and others as well. But I'm just sticking with the covenant land hybrids at this point. So you have a term that's called the terrible ones in Ezekiel 32 in the King James Version Bible. Shows up in other passages like Isaiah 14, Isaiah 25 is a terrific one on it, and elsewhere. And Nebuchadnezzar was the terrible one as well. And he's part of this sort of bloodline of terrible ones of the beast kingdoms, which are Rephaim descended kingdoms, which is another reason you need to understand giants to understand end time prophecy, and that the beast empires are all interconnected with Israel. You have to understand that to get what's going on with this end time empire that's going to rise, and then the 8th empire of Antichrist. So terrible ones are described as ones in a strange dual prophecy in Ezekiel 32, where Pharaoh, a terrible one, a Rephaim descendant thereof as a royale, is talking with two groups of peoples in the abyss. One's in the sides cells of the abyss, and the other ones are the mighty, or El. These are the fallen angels are in there, but the other ones are locked in the sides of the abyss. And these are the ones who are the terrible ones who were slain on the earth and have gone to the abyss prison. They didn't make it to Sheol or Hades, and they're not wandering the earth. These are the worst ones. So that's the Hebrew word arit. And I am, to get ones, as they translate, as the KJV translators translate it, would be eritim, which is important to understand, because when now you start to look at the meaning of that word, and why they selected terrible. Well, it can mean terrible, but they have all these other giant descriptions, and two other ones that are pertinent to what we're talking about is childless and infertility. Now, we know they could produce females. What was going on is they just couldn't produce enough females. And so in book 1, I talk about how females are highly prized to start new dynasties. And that's important because that's what happens in Genesis 36. You have Eliphaz marrying Timnah, and they're going to start a new dynasty of hybrids that's going to live amongst the Amalekim of Petra, and it's so sort of eponymously named after Amalek. But this is a dynasty that's new and important, and they become the elven ones, or the Aleph, as it comes out of Hebrew, where you have fairies, and that fairy bloodline allegories come from, with the Tuatha De Danann and others, as I link that in the first book, to try and take away all of and usurp the Messianic blessing, so they can bring about their own dragon Messiah, to take away Jacob's birthright and his blessings. So 3 things they would take legally through Israelite law if all the Israelites were wiped from the face of the earth. So they had to intermarry or go extinct because they didn't produce enough females.
Wow. And
in the Ugaritic texts, they're trying to bring Baal and Ashtaroth back to create more Rephaim, where Repium, RPM, Old Semitic, is where you take that root word for Rephaim from. They want him to create more Rephaim and more other kinds of giants for the assembly of the Tanu, which is, we would also understand as the Tuatha De Danann. And all the other giants that are part of this assembly at Mount Hermon with the assembly of gods, as Psalms 82 talks about over the 70 nations, both before and after the flood, as Deuteronomy 32 talks about. And so you have them trying to bring Baal and Ashtaroth back because they're gone. They did the same crimes as the hierarchy of angels did, the parent gods did before the flood. Baal is son of El. In all pantheons around the world, it's the offspring gods that somehow take over, usually by killing immortals, which is an oxymoron. You can't kill an immortal, right? Otherwise they wouldn't be immortal. And they take over. What happened is the parent gods went to the abyss.